and welcome to CCTV News. I'm Dongmin Baisheng. A Cairo court has convicted former Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak of embezzlement, and he faces 3 years in prison, while 155 Muslim Brotherhood supporters have also been sentenced to jail. But the graft case against the 86-year-old is one of the two against the former president who was ousted in an anti-government protest in 2011 after nearly 3 decades in power. On Wednesday, Mubarak's two sons, one-time heir apparent Gamal and wealthy businessman Alaa, were also convicted of graft and each sentenced to 4 years in prison. The three Mubaraks were convicted of embezzlement charges of millions of US dollars worth of state funds over a time frame of more than a decade toward the end of Hosni Mubarak's rule. Meanwhile, the 155 Brotherhood members were sentenced relating to violence in the Nile Delta province of Mansour last August after the army's ouster of President Mohamed Morsi. Then the charges included instigating violence, chaos and membership in a banned group. Twin car bombings in central Nigeria have killed at least 118 people and brought entire buildings down in the latest attack suspected by the militant group Boko Haram. The coordinator of the National Emergency Management Agency reported the death toll, adding that 56 people were also injured in the blast. However, local police in the city of Jos maintained that only 46 people were killed and 45 injured. Meanwhile, the military said the explosions were caused by improvised explosive devices hidden in the truck and a minibus. And the second device went off about 20 minutes after the first, as the emergency service workers tended to initial victims. And President Goodluck Jonathan suggested Boko Haram was to blame for the Tuesday attack, but he assured Nigerians that their government remains fully committed to winning the war against terror. Russia says troops deployed for exercises near the Ukrainian border are preparing to return to their permanent bases. The Russian Defense Ministry said in a statement that the Russian military have spent a day dismantling field camps, packing and moving toward train stations and airfields. These were in the Rostov, Belgorod and the Bryansk provinces. The statement said troops were returning to their permanent bases but did not specify how many were leaving the border provinces. And the move follows President Vladimir Putin's earlier orders and may ease tensions before Sunday's presidential election in Ukraine. However, a NATO military officer in Brussels has disputed the claims, saying that they have yet to see still any troop withdrawal from the Ukrainian border. Meanwhile, Ukraine is preparing for its presidential election on Sunday, even as the country continues unrest. In the east, anti-government groups declaring independence voted to break away from Ukraine, and the situation in the east is marked by violence between anti-governmental activists and Ukraine military. And the southern peninsula Crimea held a similar referendum in March and is now governed by Russian rule. Stephanie Fried in Crimea gives an eyewitness account.
2 months post-referendum, Crimea's 2 million residents are in transition. The majority ethnic Russian enclave overwhelmingly voted to join Russia, and consequently, Moscow officials are now pouring into this region to oversee administrative changeover. Earlier this month, Russian President Vladimir Putin visited Crimea, effectively sealing the deal. The transition translates into Ukraine bank and business shutdowns as Crimea adopts Russia's currency. Cash is in demand, and many who held money in Ukraine banks are unable to access their money. The region's minority Tatar Muslim population fears persecution under Russian rule. Thousands have fled Crimea for central Ukraine. Many Crimeans support opposition in eastern Ukraine. Others are alarmed by developments in the east.
Voting here would have meant signing up for war in Donetsk. Donetsk won't be handed over without a war. That's the horrifying part of this situation.
For the most part, Crimeans are cavalier about this transition phase. They say they knew it would be tough and that they prefer alliance with Russia over Ukraine. Stephanie Fried, CCTV, Simferopol, Crimea.
A hacker scandal involving a video is disrupting Colombia's presidential campaign just days before Sunday's election, is making the already volatile electoral process even more contentious. But the spotlight on another candidate has been getting more attention and could possibly impact the landscape of Colombian politics, the blank vote. Now, CCTV's Michelle Begue has this story.
A video published by the Colombian news magazine Semana allegedly shows Colombia's leading presidential candidate, Oscar Iván Zuluaga, getting secret military information from a man who was arrested earlier this month and accused of illegal hacking activities. Zuluaga has told Colombians the video is a vulgar montage being used to smear his campaign. But doubts have been cast, and the video is adding to the list of scandals that have hit this presidential election season.
Las candidaturas de Oscar Iván Zuluaga y Juan Manuel Santos.
The candidacies of Oscar Iván Zuluaga and President Juan Manuel Santos have been fighting on issues that don't have anything to do with the electoral debate, by denouncing campaign irregularities, looking to shatter the confidence of voters, for the opposition to say, don't vote for him, look at what we have found.
According to an Ipsos poll released last Friday, Zuluaga has a slight lead, receiving 29.5% of the vote versus 28.5% for Santos. Colombian law forbids the publication of polls 7 days before a presidential election, and it's unclear whether the latest scandal has impacted the results. But this could make way for another option on the ballot box for citizens to consider: the blank vote.
Next Sunday from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. we can bring down a system without breaking one window, without scratching a wall, or killing anyone, or insulting anyone, just by voting blank.
For those who are unsatisfied with the candidates presented, they can simply check the box that says blank vote. It is much more powerful than abstaining, because if the blank vote receives 50% during these elections, then another election has to be called with new candidates.
And the blank vote has grown as a phenomenon this election season. Historically, the blank vote reaches 5% in most elections. But since Ipsos began polling in November of last year, this option has been as high as 30%. If 50% of registered voters on election day choose to mark their ballots with a blank vote, the impact would be undeniably huge, and the candidate without a face could possibly win. Michelle Begue, CCTV, Colombia.
Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro has criticized the United States after a committee of the U.S. Senate approved legislation that seeks to punish Venezuelan officials accused of human rights violations.
There is no need for this Congress or any of their senators or some of their congressmen to meddle in the affairs of Venezuela. I repudiate, reject, and detest the interference of these extreme right-wing sectors of the United States in the internal affairs of the homeland of Bolivar.
Bill approved by the Senate Foreign Relations Committee recommends visa suspensions and asset freezes on U.S. soil against Venezuelan officials accused of violating human rights. And the bill comes amid reports that talks between the Venezuelan government and the opposition have broken down over the civil unrest in the country, and accusations have been made against the government of clamping down hard on the unrest that has been continuing in Venezuela for the past few months. And protesters are unhappy with the rising prices, corruption and unavailability of basic commodities. You're watching CCTV News. We'll be right back. You're watching CCTV News. A drunk university student wielding a knife has attacked riders on board a subway train in Taipei, killing 3 people and injuring at least 22 others. The seemingly random attack occurred at about 4 p.m., the start of the evening rush hour on Taipei's Banqiao line, which connects to the city's southwestern suburbs. Security guards quickly called the police, who then appeared and took the assailant into custody. A Taipei police chief said the assailant told police he had intended to commit something shocking and big. Now, Hong Yan Chan was the first Chinese immigrant in the United States licensed to practice law. Even though he was admitted to the New York State Bar, a controversial 1882 law prevented him from actually practicing as a lawyer in California. And more than 100 years later, law students in California are pushing for him to be posthumously admitted to the California State Bar. The CCTV's Mark New has this story.
These law students at the University of California, Davis are part of a project that could make an impact on history. They're asking the California State Bar to posthumously admit Chinese immigrant Han Yan-Cheng.
Just being able to take a stance and say and acknowledge that something in the past was wrong, I think can heal our society a little bit and help us to become more aware of this in the future and to take a stance in favor of diversity in the future.
Born from humble roots in Guangdong province in China, Cheng graduated with honors from Columbia Law School in 1886. After first being rejected by the New York State Bar on grounds he was not a citizen, Cheng reapplied and successfully gained admission due to his resourcefulness in securing a naturalization certificate from a court in New York. But when he came to California to help out the Chinese community, the state Supreme Court denied his eligibility to practice law, declaring his naturalization certificate from New York invalid. The Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 not only prevented Chinese labor immigration to America, but also refused courts the right to grant citizenship to Chinese residents already in the country. That act was finally repealed in 1943.
In the United States, there's a tradition of Chinese immigrants doing laundry work, doing restaurant work, owning grocery stores, and as I understand it, this is not because these were traditional occupations of these Chinese immigrants back in China. It's because of various sorts of discrimination, these prohibitions. I don't think that a lot of people realize that, even many Chinese immigrants today.
Chin is working with his students to right the wrongs of history and to shed light on a decision that is still in the books.
Even though we don't have that anymore, there's still built into our laws implicit ways that we treat other people as others still. And it's reflected in the way we do sentencing of certain people.
The Asian Pacific American Law Students Association here at UC Davis is spearheading the campaign for justice, but they are not the only ones eagerly anticipating a decision. 30 years ago, Rochelle Chong knew little about her great-uncle Han Yan-Cheng, but she tracked down a California Bar Association historian who knew more.
And he said, "Miss Chong, I know why your great-uncle was not allowed to practice law in California. I am holding in my hand a California Supreme Court case called In Re Han Yan-Cheng that specifically denies your great-uncle the ability to practice law because he is Chinese."
Ironically, Chong is now a lawyer with two cousins who are also California lawyers. And Chong continues the family tradition of trailblazing, having been appointed the first Asian American commissioner at the Federal Communications Commission in 1994. But she's still in awe of her great-uncle and what he went through to become the first lawyer of Chinese ancestry to ever practice in America.
You know, he got into Columbia Law School without an undergrad degree. That's just amazing to me. And then he fought through so many obstacles presented to him by the New York Supreme Court and a federal Chinese Exclusion Act to become a New York lawyer. He did it. You really have to say, if great-uncle can do it, so can I.
The one thing that did elude him, though, was the right to practice law in California. But a decision is expected this summer, perhaps proving that the wheels of justice never stop turning. Mark New, CCTV, Davis, California.
And that's all for this edition of CCTV News. I'm Li Dongning in Beijing. Thanks for watching.